Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlene O'Reilly, and I'm working on the Business Continuity team. And I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar for the Tourism Accommodation Providers Business Continuity Scheme 2022. During this session, we'll be able to provide you with the details on the eligibility, qualifying criteria, funding, and finally the application processes, followed by a question and answer section. And for this, we'll be joined by my colleague, Jessica McKillop, Manager of the Business Continuity team. I will now hand you over to my colleague, Jane Darcy, who will take you through the next part of the webinar.
Thank you, Charlene, and everybody's very welcome this afternoon. We're delighted you could join us for this webinar. We hope that this session will answer some of your questions in relation to the scheme. As you know, Minister Catherine Martin secured funding in Budget 2022, specifically for the Business Continuity Programme. The Tourism Accommodation Providers Business Continuity Scheme 2022 is the fourth scheme in our programme of funding, and the scheme launches next Wednesday, the 9th of March, and it will be open for applications for 4 weeks, closing at noon on the 6th of April. I would like to say at this point that if you intend to apply, please submit your application in ahead of that date and time, just in case you've any IT issues on the day, as late applications will not be accepted. As Charlene mentioned, I'm going to talk through some key points for this scheme: eligible business, qualifying criteria, funding, and lastly, the application process, finishing up with some questions and answers. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the eligible businesses. It is important that you must be registered or approved or in the process of applying for your approval by the 8th of March. The scheme is broadly similar to last year. A lot of you will be familiar with that scheme, and the guidelines will be released next Wednesday afternoon when the scheme opens. The overall purpose of the scheme is to assist these businesses to withstand the challenges and continuing impact of COVID-19 by providing a direct financial contribution to support your business's continuity for areas such as fixed costs and to continue operating through 2022. We will next look at the qualifying criteria for this scheme. Just making sure my slides are in the right place. Yes, they are. And so it is important to note the following criteria. Your business must be a relevant business type, a registered approved tourism accommodation provider. You must have a minimum eligible tourism turnover of €50,000 in the year 2019. You must have experienced a 50% downturn in tourism turnover in 2021 compared to 2019. And for tourism 2021 turnover, we would ask that you exclude EWSS and other government payments or state aid received. You must be an existing operator and trading prior to January 1st, 2020. Also, you must be tax cleared, as not being tax cleared may hold up your payments. And then finally you must intend to continue trading in 2022 in line with government guidance. I will now take you through the funding award for this scheme. Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Colette. I lost control of the slides, apologies. The funding for this scheme is a ring-fence fund, and it's divided out on a pro rata basis. The grant award will be based on a number of units per applicant property, and the units that we speak of are either bedrooms or pitches. On closure of the scheme, the total fund available will be divided by the total number of eligible applicant units, and the grant award based on the number of units per applicant property. The maximum grant per legal entity is €800,000. Our aim in Fáilte Ireland is to divide the fund as fairly and equitably as possible. I will now give you some tips and practical advice for submitting your application form in order to expedite the evaluation process. Please make sure that all information provided on your application form is accurate. So basically, help us to help you. Here are some helpful tips to make this process easier for you when applying for the scheme. Number 1, set aside some uninterrupted time to submit your application form. Number 2, make a checklist of all the information and documents that you require. Number 3, make sure you are putting in the right information in the right place on the application form. And please make sure that you press save at the end of each application page before you move on to the next page. Number 5, you are required to provide the number of units approved at your property. And number 6, if possible, to ask a business partner or a co-worker to check the application before you submit. If you have any difficulties during the application process, you can contact customer support for assistance. And then I'm going to say a few words on how to apply. This is all done via the Fáilte Ireland Trade Portal. So the scheme opens next Wednesday, the 9th, for 4 weeks. It closes at noon on the 6th of April. We realise just how important these funds are for your business. And so there's 3 things I'd like you to take away from today. First, the schemes are largely the same as last year, with some tweaks such as minimum eligible turnover being applied and the funding being based on eligible units per property. Secondly, the downturn threshold has been reduced from 75 to 50% to increase the number of applicants that could be eligible for the scheme. Finally, in applying for these, we are asking you or the person responsible in your business to set aside some time to complete the applications to ensure that the evaluation of the applications is a smooth process. So please do lean on the guidelines and support notes that will be published when the scheme goes live next week. And that's all from me, and I'm going to hand you back to Charlene. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. We will now go through the questions received both by the registration and during this webinar. Please note, it will not be possible to answer your business-specific questions. However, if you do need further information relating to your own business, you can contact customer support and we will respond to you directly there. I will now invite Jessica McKillop to join myself and Jane on screen to go through the questions and answers.
Thanks, Charlene. Hi, everyone.
Okay, welcome, Jess. So just to kick off, there's quite a few questions here and still coming in. So firstly, Jess, if you could answer for me, please. If my application is successful, when can I expect payment?
Thanks, Charlene. So like Jane went through in her presentation, the scheme is POP-based, so all applications will need to be evaluated prior to the calculation of any awards. So we're hoping to go through this as fast as possible, but we do expect a rather large volume of applications to this scheme. So we are anticipating that it'll be June before any payments can be made. Now, I know that Jane did reference this a number of times in her presentation as well, but the cleaner the information that you provide, the faster we can get through this. So we did have a significant number of typos in our last accommodation scheme, potentially a 0 in the wrong place or a decimal in the wrong place. And it's really important that a lot of care is taken by the applicants when filling out the application form.
Okay. Next question, Jessica, if you could take this please too. What should I include in my turnover figures? Important information.
Absolutely. So the turnover can only relate to activity in the Republic of Ireland. So if you have any properties or accommodation businesses in another jurisdiction, they won't be eligible. And it is important to remember that we are, I suppose, relying on a number of self-declarations for the scheme, but the scheme will be subject to audit, and there will also be detailed evaluation on a sample of the applicants within the scheme as we work through the evaluation process.
Okay, thanks for that, Jessica. And maybe one more from your side, if you could take this one. What is the difference between statutory or non-statutory? Can you explain what this means?
Thanks, Charlene. I actually thought we would get asked this question. So
yeah.
I have the text prepared because it's quite technical. So bear with me. I'm actually going to read it out because it's a legislative act. So it's the Tourist Traffic Act 1939 to 2016. So businesses that use certain prescribed terms to describe themselves have to register at Fáilte Ireland. So these would be known as statutory accommodation sectors. So they would include the likes of hotels or guest houses or caravan and camping parks, self-catering, that would be 8 units or more on one site. And then if we look at the ones that in relation to other sectors that are known as non-statutory, approval under these sectors is voluntary. So here we're talking about B&Bs, historic houses, or self-catering, 7 units or less. And then we have Fáilte Ireland's welcome standard as well.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Jessica. Jane, over to you this time. Is this scheme available to those who received a grant before Christmas time?
Yes, if you received a payment in the last Tourism Accommodation Providers Business Continuity Scheme, a mouthful, you may apply again. Just to note though, you must meet all the eligible criteria, and that will be published next week for the scheme, regardless of payment in the previous schemes.
Okay. And Jessica, back to you if I could. How is the grant calculated?
Thanks, Charlene. So as Jane mentioned in her presentation there, the grant will be calculated as a result of it's a pot-based scheme. So it's unlike any of our other business continuity schemes. So we'll be calculating the grant once all eligible applicants have been evaluated. So that has a huge dependency, again, just back to my first question on the timing of the scheme. So the metric that we'll be using here is registered units. So the units that we're working with here is a bedroom for a hotel, a guest house, a pitch for camping and caravanning. And then with hostels, they'll be treated slightly differently. So we're asking hostels to divide their registered bed spaces by 4, which they would have done last year as well. And then once we have processed and determined all eligible applicants and units, we'll divide that by the total funding available to arrive at a unit value. So to give you an example, and I would stress that this is an example for the purpose of this exercise, just because we don't know the total amount at the moment, but if we take €200 per unit, and then if we look at a 100-bed hotel, they would receive €20,000. Again, I'm stressing that's an example, and that, the full and final amounts will be determined when we pay out.
Okay. Thanks, Jessica. Jessica, you might have answered this, but you might just need to just reiterate in a sentence, what do you mean by units?
So by units, we're referring to the bed spaces.
Okay, perfect. And Jane, let's go back to you. This one here. Let me see. Yeah. Over what time period must the grant be spent?
Okay, thank you. There's no fixed time frame, but the funding is to support the business fixed costs in 2022.
Okay, Jane. And Jane, another one for you, please. I am a B&B owner and have received the adaptation fund or the restart grant. Does that exclude me from this particular scheme?
No, it doesn't exclude you. As long as you meet the eligibility criteria, you can apply, but don't include those grant figures in your turnover information. But we will ask separately on the form for you to declare those, but they'll be just in separately and not to be included in the turnover.
Okay, that's perfect. And then Jane, this is one that comes up in our webinars regularly. What if my financial year doesn't run from January to December?
That's no problem. While we are looking for the total tourism turnover in 2019, if your business doesn't operate on a calendar year, we may require this information from 2 sets of accounts.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, and do I need to be a registered property with Fáilte Ireland, Jane, please?
Yes, you do, either approved currently or at least in application by the 8th of March. There are details available on Fáilte Ireland's website under the Quality Assurance tab if you did require to be to be approved by Fáilte Ireland.
Okay, thanks for that, Jane. Jessica, we go back to you, please.
Sure.
Maybe I'll take this one. I own more than one property. Do I have to do a separate application for each, or can multiple properties be put on the one form?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can accept one application from a group of properties. As per the previous scheme, we have an Excel spreadsheet which will be made available to you to download within the application form, where you can fill out the individual property details. So just a group of hotels with shared ownership will come in as one application, and then they'll be capped at the €800,000, which is the maximum scheme cap here.
Okay, that sounds good. And Jane, just one here for you. How will the grant be paid, please?
Following evaluation and approval, the grant will be paid into the bank account indicated and verified on the application form.
Okay, we're roughly halfway through our question time now, but they are still coming in. So maybe back to Jessica on this one. What would be the cap for a business who was paid in the first business continuity scheme, please, Jessica?
Thanks, Charlene. So there's no cap in relation to the previous grant paid. So if you were successful in receiving grant funding from the previous accommodation scheme, you can still apply here, but there is a state aid cap of 2.3 million that cannot be exceeded. So that's the EU temporary state aid framework that we're working under. So if on final calculation that your application goes beyond that limit, then that funding would be reduced accordingly. But there is no other cap other than the 800k and the 2.3.
Okay, that's good. And Jane, what documents can be accepted as financial statements for the application? This is a really important one for everyone.
Sure. Yeah, as part of the application for this scheme, we're not asking for financial statements. However, when we do begin evaluations, a number of applications will be asked for detailed financial information. So if we do ask for this, you will be required to provide financial statements for 2019, along with management accounts for 2021. So if you are asked for these, please ensure they're as accurate as possible. So just to reiterate, they're not asked for in the initial application form, but we will reach out to a sample number of applicants.
There will be some follow-on for some applicants. Brilliant. Correct. Okay, yeah. That's perfect. Jessica, can you please explain again how the grant is allocated? I am a hostel owner, so how would it be allocated for me?
Perfect. Thanks, Charlene. So like Jane called out in her presentation, Fáilte Island wants to be fair and equitable in the distribution of the funding. So in the case of a hostel, the registered unit is a bed space. So what we're asking hostels to do is to divide their registered bed spaces by 4 to arrive at a unit value for the purpose of this scheme. And then we'll apply that once we've all eligible applicants worked out and our total funds.
Okay, I think that clarifies that one. Let me see, take this one. Jane, if you could take this one, please. If I have non-tourism turnover in 2020, will this exclude me from this scheme?
No, it wouldn't exclude you from the scheme, but we, for the purpose of evaluating, are only interested in 2019 and 2021 turnover figures, which must be tourism related. So, even if your accounts have other figures, we need to have the tourism turnover identified.
Okay. And then also, Jane, if you could take this one, is 2019 turnover relating to the business financial year or the calendar year? Popular question.
This is the calendar year, and I do understand that some businesses don't operate on a calendar year. So if you are part of the sample and you're asked for the additional financial information, you may need to provide 2 years worth of financial information to us.
Okay. And also, you may have touched on this in the presentation. When is the scheme opening, Jane, please?
No harm to remind. It goes Wednesday, 9th of March next week, and then there'll be 4 weeks to submit your application, closing at noon on the 6th of April.
Okay, that's great, Jane. So back to Jessica, please, on this one, if I can. If I have received CRSS payments, am I eligible to apply for this scheme?
Yes, absolutely. You may still apply for the scheme. Yeah.
Okay, that's good news. Jane, if I could take this one for you. Is one of the accommodation... Hi, I am one of the accommodation providers. Sorry, I actually cannot read this one. If one is a new accommodation provider in 2020, is that eligible?
Unfortunately not. As this scheme is to support businesses affected by the pandemic, businesses must have been operating in 2019 and have eligible tourism turnover during that year of a minimum €50,000 turnover.
Okay, so not for a new accommodation provider. Okay.
In 2020, no.
Okay. And also, Jessica, when verifying if turnover is down 50%, do you include grant revenue such as Restart or CRSS?
Thanks, Charlene. Yeah, that's a really good question. So these supports don't need to be included in your turnover, but we will ask you to declare them in your application form. And I might just include there as well, I know it wasn't part of the question, but EWSS as well would be another support that you may have received that we would just ask you to declare in your application form. But again, we won't be making any deductions or anything like that.
Okay. Let me see where we are with that one. Jane, if I could go back on this one to you, do you need to know the amount of Restart grant you received?
Yes, if possible. We do have a section on the form where we ask for funding supports that have been received, but again, that is not to be included in your turnover.
Okay. And also, if you could answer this one, Jane, an accounts letter is required. What does that need to contain?
If your eligible tourism turnover is in excess of €1 million, you do require an accountant or auditor's letter to confirm that this is the case.
Okay. And we're coming kind of near the close of our questions. Maybe a few more. We've got time to take a few more, I think. If you're seasonal only 7 months of the year, does the 50k still apply? This comes up in many of our webinars.
Perfect. Do you want me to take that one, Charlene?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Apologies, Jessica.
Perfect. No, that's fine. Eligible tourism turnover, yes, must be 50,000 in 2019, regardless of the months. So if you're seasonal, it still applies. It still has to be the 50,000.
Okay, if you could take maybe one more as well, Jessica, regarding declaration of previous grant aid. Is this just grants received since March 2020?
Yes, just the supports received as a result of the pandemic. Absolutely. So since March 2020.
Okay. And do we have time for maybe a couple more? Potentially, yes. So your trade portal has changed. Does it mean we have to re-register again? Jess, do you want to take that, Jessica, please?
No problem. Yeah. Absolutely. So no, it doesn't, but if you're locked out for any reason, I would suggest that you contact the customer support team and they will help you get back into your account and provide you with any assistance that you need.
Absolutely. We've a couple more just have come in last minute, so I think we've got time to include those. Do you have to have had income from last year? I've been closed since COVID began.
No, you don't. You don't have to have had income from 2021.
Okay. Is there anything else here? Yes, there is actually. Would a B&B be classed as statutory, Jessica?
A B&B would be non-statutory, Charlene. So.
Okay, non-statutory for that one. And just to reiterate, if there is any business-specific questions, you can contact our customer support. I think I mentioned that earlier as well. Let me see. In TBCF Phase 1+, accommodation providers registered as a charity were eligible. Is this still the case? That's a good question.
Yeah, no, absolutely still the case, yeah, and will still be eligible.
Okay. And then my business, maybe finally on this one, ladies, my business does not meet the minimum turnover threshold of 50,000. Am I eligible for any support at all?
I can take that one if you like, Jane.
Yeah, Jessica, please.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. So unfortunately for us in our TBCS schemes, the minimum turnover has to be €50,000, and that is a condition of all of our business continuity schemes. So we've held that throughout.
Across the board. Yeah, absolutely. There's just one here finally, actually, I think we should include. Is there any restriction on hotel groups applying?
Absolutely not. That they can apply and they can, I think I answered that question earlier on, but they can apply and do one application, and there's an Excel that they can download within their application form where they can fill out all their individual hotels. The cap for the group will be €800,000, subject overall to the 2.3 then of the temporary state aid framework.
That's perfect. I think that concludes the question and answers. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jane.
Thanks, Charlene.
And thank you all for your attendance today. Further information will be available on the website, including a copy of this recording for reference. And this will be available once this scheme opens on Wednesday, the 9th of March. That's next Wednesday, the 9th of March. So please just visit www.fáilteireland.ie and go to the funding tab, and it will be saved there in the relevant grant page. Thank you all for watching.